In at 5, A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. Published in 2015, A Head Full of Ghosts is a horror novel that involves an American family under strain when their 14-year-old daughter Marjorie exhibits signs of mental illness, with the story being told from the point of view of Marjorie's 8-year-old sister Mary. Now, we learn quite quickly that it is not mental illness, but is instead a demonic possession. Well, that's what we're told to believe anyway. With the family short on money, they agree to let a film crew into their home to shoot a reality show called The Possession about Marjorie and her upcoming exorcism. However, the show does nothing but tear the family further apart, and during this time, Marjorie drops a bombshell on her sister Mary that turns everything on its head. 15 years after the events, Mary recounts her tale in an interview when dark secrets surface, secrets that are absolutely terrifying. Any horror told through the eyes of a young child is haunting. Add possession into the mix and a forced reality show, well, now we have all the elements for a perfect horror novel. Now, unlike the rest of our numbers, Focus Features has optioned the rights to A Head Full of Ghosts, so here's hoping we see the story come to life on the big screen very soon. In at 4, The Fisherman by John Langan. First published in 2016, The Fisherman takes place in upstate New York in the woods around Woodstock, where Dutchman's Creek flows out of the Ashokan Reservoir, offering the promise of fine fishing and of something more, something far too absurd to be true. When Abe and Dan become fast friends after discovering their shared passion for fishing, they begin to hear rumors of the creek and what might be found there. They find themselves drawn into the tale and head towards Dutchman's Creek, where long buried secrets and a mysterious figure known as Der Fischer is said to remain. Now, The Fisherman is one of the best horror novels of not just 2016, but also the last decade. Now, sadly, this book will likely not be turned into a movie simply because John Langan took full advantage of the freedom of writing, with the narrative being wrapped in another narrative filled to the brim with giant monsters and dark magic, resembling the works of H.P. Lovecraft, specifically at the Mountains of Madness, which would be surprisingly easier to shoot, and that's saying a lot. Now, The Fisherman, though filled with horrifying elements, is about loss itself, and two men struggling to deal with their issues of loss and learning to carry on in the face of insurmountable grief. The Fisherman is a cosmic horror, unlike anything that has been penned before, with its mind-bending and heartbreaking tale of love, loss, and boundless horrors, making it the perfect addition to any horror lover's bookshelf. However, like I said, it's a cosmic horror, and at times even more intense than the works of H.P. Lovecraft. With the right director and all the money in the world, perhaps one day it will be brought to life. I have my doubts though. In at 3, Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. From the off, I should say that I read this novel when I was way too young, and I do not recommend, because some of these chapters and short stories in the book will linger in your mind for quite some time. One story in particular I've never forgotten. You've been warned. First published in 2005, Haunted has a plot that has a frame story for a series of 23 short stories, most preceded by a free-verse poem, with each story being followed by a chapter of the main narrative. Yeah, it's confusing and perhaps why the book has never been turned into a movie, but I still have hope. It's also written by the guy who did Fight Club, and that got turned into a movie, so there's always hope. Anyway, the main story centers on a group of 17 people who have decided to participate in a writer's retreat after seeing it posted on a bulletin board of a cafe in Oregon. Now, I won't spoil this book for you, that would just be rude. However, I will say after some things go down, the 17 individuals become trapped in the home, and in turn begin to believe that an increase in their suffering will provide better stories for when they're eventually rescued. So without the gory details, some of the characters begin to engage in self-mutilation and cannibalism, all for a more interesting story. Haunted is a novel that explores how far some people will go for their art and the suffering from isolation. Now, it's no surprise this novel has not been turned into a movie. The description alone is enough to make some people cringe, but I still have hope that one day the likes of Eli Roth will nab the rights and bring something wonderfully gory to the big screen. In at 2, The Troop by Nick Cutter. The Troop is perhaps one of my favourite horror novels of all time, and that's a bold statement, especially coming from me, but it's the truth. Published in 2014, this horror novel follows Scoutmaster Tim Riggs and his troop of boys who once a year head into the Canadian wilderness for a 3-day camping trip. Comfortable, reliable tradition that of course makes for a perfect horror story. On the first night of their trip, an unexpected intruder stumbles into their camp. He's shockingly thin, pale, and worse, ferociously hungry, in turn exposing Tim and the boys to something far more terrifying than any ghost story. A bioengineered nightmare. A nightmare that spreads through the camp faster than fear itself. Now, I will not ruin this book for you because, like I said, this is one of my favourite horror books of all time. All you need to know is that the camp intruder, the human carrier of this virus, unleashes something truly disturbing onto the camp, something that will haunt my nightmares for years to come. It's disturbingly visceral, at times painfully descriptive, and terribly sad, all at the same time. It shows us the extremes young boys will go to when they meet something beyond any of their comprehensions. Now, if you don't want to take my word for it, the book even comes with Stephen King's stamp of approval. I quote, "The troop scared the hell out of me, and I couldn't put it down." In the acknowledgements of the book, Cutter even credits King's novel Carrie as an inspiration for the structure of his book. So you know you're in for a horrifying treat from the get-go. And what makes it one of the greatest of its time, it will never ever be predictable and deserves to be made into a horror flick that we can experience visually. And finally, in at number 1, Wylding Hall by Elizabeth Hand. Published in 2015, Wylding Hall is a terrifying horror that follows a British acid folk band that hold themselves up in Wylding Hall, an ancient country home with incredibly dark secrets. It is in this terrifying English estate that the band create their album that will garner them all the success. But at what cost? Julian Blake, the lead singer of the band, disappears from within the mansion and is never seen or heard from again. So years later, the surviving members of the group, as well as a psychic, a photographer and the band's manager, meet a young documentary filmmaker in order to tell their own versions of what went down in Wylding Hall and what really happened to Julian Blake. Of course, through the process of filming, dark secrets emerge about each member and their loved ones, making you question all of the characters you thought you could trust. Now, although the story may resemble the comfortable, familiar haunted house story, that is not the case. The book is framed as a set of interviews, something drastically unique to the classic haunted house structure. However, the interviews don't go as expected. What we expect is differing events, unique versions from different band members. But that's not the case. Each interview remains unswervingly consistent, with each person describing a ghostly young woman who was lured into the open by Julian's performance of a haunting folk song. Now, there are of course some gothic trappings, secret passageways, icy sensations, and constant uneasiness, all housed within a crumbling estate. This book is truly terrifying, take my word for it, and seeing it on the big screen would quite easily rival the fear felt in The Woman in Black and the horrifying horror show The Haunting of Hill House. Coming in at 5, The Guardian by Jeffrey Konvitz. Now, this is actually a sequel to a New York Times bestselling book, The Sentinel, but it's The Guardian that's worthy of your attention. Published in 1979, it follows satanic forces which return to an apartment building on Manhattan's Upper West Side with the discovery of a grotesque charred body and 2 other eerily linked murders. When a woman stumbles upon the body, she is raped. Her husband then begins a furious quest for revenge. Yeah, it's a lot. This book is literally filled to the brim with all the successful movie essentials. Satanic forces, revenge, passion, mystery, and a blind nun with sinister intentions. The entire book is full of hellish twists and turns, expertly articulating what happens when you come face to face with evil incarnate. Better yet, it can be read as a standalone, so don't fret if you haven't read The Sentinel first. Now, the book's predecessor has previously been adapted into a movie back in 1977 and has an impressive 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb. However, folks are feeling like it's about damn time that The Guardian finally got the adaptation it deserves. Preach. Coming in at 4, House of Bones by Dale Bailey. Published back in 2003 and written by Dale Bailey, House of Bones follows an unconventional billionaire who is determined to unlock the secrets of Dreamland, a place of human suffering that has stood empty for years. He sets about on this mission with the help of 4 strangers, however they get more than they bargained for when they come face to face with evil. Now, Dale Bailey is an incredibly gifted writer with novels that are lean with great love for the English language. Throughout the course of House of Bones, you as a reader know from the off that things won't end well for our characters, yet Bailey manages to instill ever-growing suspense throughout. The entire book is a page-turner that you can't put down. House of Bones is a stellar example of the Midwestern Gothic haunted house genre. Though not always the most enjoyable read, the book is nonetheless one of the most skillful stories ever written. Basically, it's The Haunting of Hill House but in the hood. The cinematic terror of House of Bones, complete with jump scares and creaking doors, is why this book is begging for an adaptation on the big screen. Give the people what they want. Coming in at 3, Horror Show by Greg Keane. Published back in 1996 by Greg Keane, Horror Show tells the story of a schlock horror director, Landis Woodley, who is living in a decaying mansion in the Hollywood Hills. When he abandoned the movie business after being reduced to filming peep shows, he also left a laundry list of enemies, including the IRS. However, after an avid fan, Clint Stockburn, asks to write a piece on the recluse for a magazine, Woodley agrees for the mere price of $600 cash. During the interview, Stockburn travels back in time with Woodley and hears the recollection of Attack of the Haunted Saucer, the worst movie of all time. However, what Stockburn really wants to learn about is Woodley's masterpiece. Keane fondly caricatures Hollywood's schlockmeisters such as William Castle and Ed Wood in flashback accounts of the shooting of a Z-grade movie, and the curse that befell those associated with it. The film in question is called Cadaver, a movie that was set largely after hours in an LA morgue and featured real corpses wired to walk. However, the deeper they dive in, the more terrifying the truth becomes. Is a dead Satanist possessed by the devil, reaching out beyond the grave? Maybe. The book is a wild romp and fun-filled homage to monster movies. I am patiently waiting for the day this book makes its way to our big screens. One day. Maybe. Coming in at 2, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Published in 1967, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a post-apocalyptic science fiction short written by Harlan Ellison, first published in an issue of If, Worlds of Science Fiction. The book takes place 109 years after the complete destruction of human civilization. The Cold War had escalated into World War, fought mainly between China, Russia, and the United States. During the progression of the war, the three nations created a supercomputer with artificial intelligence, capable of running the war more efficiently than humans. Now, the original book is comprised of 7 short stories, but the one we are focusing on is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The aforementioned AM has destroyed all of humanity except for 5 people, whom he has been keeping alive and torturing for the past 109 years. It's a disturbing and generally upsetting read that ends with, spoilers incoming, AM focusing all of its rage on one particular character, Ted, and to ensure he can never kill himself, AM transforms him into a helpless, gelatinous blob with huge eyes and no mouth that is incapable of causing itself harm, and constantly alters his perception of time to deepen his anguish. Ted's closing thoughts end with the sentence that gives the story its title: I have no mouth and I must scream. Endless chills. Can you imagine this movie on the big screen? Terrifying. Now, a little tidbit of information for fans of the short: it was actually turned into a video game which was equally as depressing. In this 1995 point-and-click adventure game, you as the player must make key decisions through ethical dilemmas that deal with issues such as insanity, paranoia, and genocide. Fun for the whole family. Am I right? And finally, coming in at number 1, Swan Song by Robert R. McCammon. Published back in 1987 and written by Robert R. McCammon, Swan Song is a horror novel, specifically a work of post-apocalyptic fiction that described the aftermath of a nuclear war that provokes an evolution in humankind. Now an ancient evil roams the desolate landscape of a ravaged America. He is a man with a scarlet eye, a malevolent force that feeds on the dark desires of countless followers. His only desire is to find a special child named Swan and destroy her. However, those who protect the girl are determined to fight for what is left of the world and keep her safe from the evil hunting her down. This book is incredible but utterly bleak and depressing. I quote, "The sky was filled with waves of moving, blinking stars. Wheels of light rolls across the darkness over the trailer court and streaks of yellow fire zigzagged upward into the haze that obscured the moon. Thousands upon thousands of fireflies were passing overhead like galaxies in motion, their signals forming chains of light that stretched from west to east as far as Swan could see. Endless missiles. A child's thoughts. Chills. Honestly, this film would be a horrifying, emotional rollercoaster on the big screen, and I'm here for it, because I love sadness." Coming in at number 5, we have White is Bewitching by Helen Oyemi. A ghost, vampire, haunted house story all in one. That's exactly what you get from Helen Oyemi and her novel White is Bewitching, which was published back in 2009. The novel takes place on the cliffs near Dover, in a mysterious house where the Silver family resides. However, there is no peace in the home as the family is reeling from the loss of Lily, with her twins Miranda and Elliot and her husband all mourning the absence in very few words. However, it isn't just loss that is present within the home. There is a quiet rumbling, something festering, bending the minds of not just the readers but also the characters. Not to mention something is going on with Miranda, who has developed an eating disorder for non-edible items, descending into depression and suffering a complete mental break. At the home, however, it has become clear that the house has a personality of its own, attacking guests and terrifying its occupants. The book, more importantly, is a social commentary about xenophobia and acceptance, with the house turning on Miranda's girlfriend who is black, and the ghost within its walls exhibiting violent tendencies. Miranda must not only fight her inner demons, but also the demons that plague her home. It is truly a unique story, and an important one at that. What's even more unique about the novel is that it takes on many perspectives, including the house itself. If you haven't yet, definitely check this one out immediately. You will not be disappointed. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps us out a lot in the YouTube algorithm. Coming in at number 4, we have Broken Monsters by Lauren Bukes. One of 2 detective novels on our list, Broken Monsters was written by Lauren Bukes and published back in 2014. The story itself follows Detective Gabriella Versado, who works in Detroit's inner city, and as you would expect, she's seen her fair share of fatalities and bodies. However, there is a new case that is different from the rest, a half-boy, half-deer fused together. Yet this would prove to be the first of many, with more peculiar and more disturbing bodies being discovered across the city, with reality appearing to be tearing at the seams in this mind-bending body horror. No one is safe. Who is next? Versado's daughter is flirting with a potential predator online, while the local freelance journalist Jono is doing absolutely anything to get an exclusive on the case. But if you're Thomas Kane, you are simply trying to protect your homeless family. All these stories intertwine as detectives attempt to find the monster who is seemingly set on remaking the world as its own creation, a disturbing and violent creation at that. The novel is entrancing and near impossible to put down, with Bukes' style of writing drawing you deeper and deeper into the book with each turn of the page. Not to mention the horror is crippling, with every word etching a place in your mind. This isn't a story you forget quickly, with it being violent, frightening, and incredibly clever. Coming in at number 3, we have Last Days by Brian Evanson. I think it's safe to say that we love anything cult related here on Top 5, and Last Days falls right into that category. Written by Brian Evanson and published back in 2009, Last Days is a mystery horror that follows a detective, Klein, who is kidnapped by a religious cult who believes that amputations bring you closer to God, which is baffling. The detective is there to attempt to uncover who the cult leader is and bring an end to the madness. However, in order to stop it all, will he have to sacrifice something to solve the mystery, and how far is he exactly willing to go? Last Days is incredibly intense and profoundly unsettling, with it feeling like a tumbling down the rabbit hole thriller, mixed with something far more sinister. The novel is the perfect blend of body horror and psychological horror, with a dash of black comedy in there as well, with the novel even going on to win the best horror novel of 2009. It is oddly disturbing yet also delightful, and while the experience of reading it might not be the most enjoyable, it is certainly an experience nonetheless. I mean, when you put cults and mutilation together, you're never going to get something all that pleasant, that's for sure. But if you want the feel of David Lynch meets David Cronenberg on paper, then certainly give Last Days a shot. Coming in at number 2, we have Dark Corners by Ruth Rendell. The final novel by Ruth Rendell before her death, Dark Corners is one that explores the themes of writer's block. And despite being a psychological crime fiction novel, the book is truly terrifying, digging right under your skin and making you feel all kinds of claustrophobic. The story itself follows protagonist Carl Martin. He's not necessarily likable, with him making many mistakes that lead to key moments in the story. One of the major mistakes he makes is renting out the upstairs apartment to a man named Dermot. He seems nice at first, but all is not well. Dermot blackmails Carl, begins to manipulate him, and turns his life upside down and inside out. Now, what makes the story so damn terrifying is the simple fact that the villain is human. A neighbour, a seemingly nice neighbour at that. It creates an element of authenticity. It feels like this could happen to any one of us, because the harsh truth is you never know what people's true intentions are. You never know who on the surface might seem sweet and genuine, but behind closed doors is a raging psychopath. Not to mention there is nothing supernatural about the villain in this novel. He is human through and through, just as evil as they come, thus bringing terror to everyday life. How can Carl escape it? What master plan will he have to come up with to survive? This is a novel that is certainly worth a read this summer. Go check it out. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Maynard's House by Herman Raucher. I can guarantee after learning about Maynard's House, you'll all be heading onto Amazon or into your nearest retailer to purchase a copy. And trust me when I say you will not be disappointed. First published back in 1981, Maynard's House is a horror novel written by Herman Raucher and tells the story of a young Vietnam War veteran named Austin who is suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. He learns that his best friend Maynard has been killed in combat, and to Austin's surprise, Maynard left him his home, a historical site in which a woman was once accused of witchcraft and ultimately killed around the Salem witch trials era. So Austin heads to the home located deep in the woods of northern Maine, and is initially enthralled by the home. However, mysterious events begin to take place in the house, and the snow outside begins to pile up, trapping Austin inside of the home with whatever is lurking there within. Now, the entire novel is a commentary on the effects of war, with Austin having to come to terms with the trauma he experienced in combat, with his sanity deteriorating and himself becoming more and more paranoid of the home, and what is residing in it with him. Is it the witch that the locals so often speak about, or is it something else, something from within his own mind? The novel also touches on the themes of loss, with Austin being forced to deal with the grief of losing his best friend in war, as well as the traumatic events he experienced in his own life. The book is certainly heavy, but it is a truly effective haunted house story that will linger with you long after you put it down. In at number 5, we have The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories by H.P. Lovecraft. One of many Lovecraft stories on our list, The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories was released back in 1999 and contains the following works of Lovecraft: Dagon, The Statement of Randolph Carter, Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Jermyn and His Family, Cellophase, Nyarlathotep, The Picture in the House, The Outsider, Herbert West Reanimator, The House, The Rats and the Walls, The Festival, He, Cool Air, The Call of Cthulhu, The Color Out of Space, The Whisper in Darkness, The Shadow over Innsmouth, and The Haunter of the Dark. Yes, that's a lot of a lot. But for now, let's just focus on the title itself, The Call of Cthulhu. The Call of Cthulhu was written back in 1926 and follows narrator Francis Wayland Thurston as he unearths alarming information about the figure of Cthulhu, a titanic monster with tentacles and the wings of a dragon. Along the way, we learn of a cult dedicated to Cthulhu, chant for his inevitable return. As most will know, Cthulhu is one of Lovecraft's most infamous creations, so saying that, the story is definitely worth the read, as are the rest of the shorts included in the collection. What's better than one story? 18, that's right. Coming in at number 4, we have Shadows of Carcosa, Edgar Allan Poe, Bram Stoker, and more. Shadows of Carcosa is a collection of cosmic horror stories written by some of the greats, including H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, Bram Stoker, Ambrose Bierce, and Henry James. To quote H.P. Lovecraft, "The true weird tales has something more than a secret murder, bloody bones, or a sheeted form clanking chains. An atmosphere of breathless and unexplainable dread of outer, unknown forces must be present, a hint of that most terrible conception of the human brain, a malign and particular suspension or defeat of those fixed laws of nature, which are our only safeguard against the assaults of chaos and the demons of unplumbed space." Now, one of the many stories included in the book is Lovecraft's Color Out of Space, a short story written back in 1927. In the tale, an unnamed narrator pieces together the story of an area known by the locals as the Blasted Heath in the wild hills west of the fictional town of Arkham, Massachusetts. The narrator discovers that many years ago a meteorite crashed there, poisoning every living being nearby. Vegetation grows large but foul-tasting, animals are driven mad and deformed into grotesque shapes, and the people go insane or just die one by one. This quickly became one of Lovecraft's most popular stories and remained his personal favourite of his short stories. It has since been adapted into a movie starring the great Nicolas Cage. It did get very good reviews. I have yet to watch it. I know a lot of you have been on me about watching it, but don't worry, I'll get around to it. In at number 3, we have Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. A newer selection on our list, Lovecraft Country is a 2016 dark fantasy novel written by Matt Ruff, who explores the conjunction between the horror fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, as well as racism in the United States during the era of Jim Crow laws, as experienced by black science fiction fan Atticus Turner and his family. Throughout Lovecraft Country, Atticus must navigate cosmic forces and basic civil rights while embarking on a journey to find his mysteriously missing father, employing the services of his uncle, who wrote a guide to safe travel for black people in the 1950s. On his journey, Atticus and co. encounter many large obstacles. However, it is the ending which is a real doozy, with a Get Out level plot twist. Honestly, this novel is worth a read, cosmic horror fan or not. Not to mention, in 2017, HBO announced that they were prepping an adaptation of the novel with Jordan Peele and J.J. Abrams as executive producers. The show is set to be released this summer at the time of this recording, and I, for one, cannot wait. It's been on my list for months. Coming in at number 2, we have The Fisherman by John Langan. One of the newer books on our list, The Fisherman, was published back in 2016 by contemporary horror author John Langan. The plot concerns Dan and Abe, two widowers who have found solace in each other's company and a shared passion for fishing. The pair hear rumours of Dutchman's Creek, a steep-banked, fast-moving creek that offers the promise of fine fishing, and of something more, a possibility too fantastic to be true. However, like most things, Dutchman's Creek is not the work of God, and is instead quite the opposite. Yet the men find themselves drawn into a tale of the place, which will ultimately bring the pair face to face with all that they have lost, and with the price they must pay to regain it. Will the pair be dissuaded by a local who knows of the creek's true history, or will they seek out its magic? The novel is incredibly immersive and will have you biting your nails with each turn of the page. For fans of cosmic horror, this is a modern masterpiece and should be read by all lovers of the genre. The book is almost 2 stories under one title, with it being equally a story about loss and grief as it is a horror story that will keep you engaged and terrified from start to finish. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. At the Mountains of Madness is a science fiction novella written by the creator of cosmic horror, H.P. Lovecraft, back in 1931. The story itself details the events of a disastrous expedition to the Antarctic continent in September 1930, what was ultimately discovered there by a group of explorers led by the narrator Dr. William Dye of Miskatonic University. Over the course of the story, Dye details a series of previously untold events in the hopes of deterring another group of explorers who wish to return to the continent. Throughout the story, we learn of lost cities, incomprehensibly weird creatures, oozing monsters, and of course insanity and pure horror. Now, one of those creatures so beautifully detailed in At the Mountains of Madness is Shoggoth. I quote, "Formless protoplasm able to mock and reflect all forms and organs and processes, viscous agglutinations of bubbling cells, rubbery 15-foot spheroids, infinitely plastic and ductile, slaves of suggestion, builders of cities, more and more sullen, more and more intelligent, more and more amphibious, more and more imitative. Great God, what madness made even those blasphemous old ones willing to use and carve such things?" Absolutely terrifying. At the Mountains of Madness has often been described as the perfect Lovecraftian tale, and one of the greatest cosmic horror books. The story even popularized ancient astronaut theories, as well as Antarctica's place in the ancient astronaut mythology. The story has, of course, been adapted numerous times since its initial publication, with director Guillermo del Toro even attempting to get a movie made based on the story. Fingers crossed.